I'm Maria Moreau. Today we're talking about an important issue that faces many Atlantans and people across the country and the world, and that's intimate partner abuse, household and homelessness, and an abundance of issues. But there's actually a program right here in Atlanta that is helping survivors and victims of these situations. And today to talk to us about that is, of course, Kenya Gould. She's a social worker and advocacy program manager, as well as Cynthia Pearson, who is also a program manager. Thank you both for joining me today. So right away, I want to get into what this program exactly does, and I think you're going to be best at explaining that. But what you do is you work alongside law enforcement, but also in moments that law enforcement can't be there, for intimate partner abuse, and among that, a lot of other issues. Can you talk a little bit about what Standing with Survivors is?
Yes, thank you for having us. So we are an initiative out of AVLF, or the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, and we've worked for decades, since 1979, to bring legal and social support to our neighbors experiencing instability and domestic violence. A few years ago, we established a mobile response team made up of social workers like Kenya, staff, and lawyers, which we call Standing with Survivors. And that meets survivors where they are in the community. So when people call 911 or other domestic violence hotlines, they're often referred to us for assistance. And so we come in and when there's no immediate threat or violence, to help in several ways, whether that's filing a temporary protective order, directly connecting them with shelters or other resources, but also helping them navigate legal processes such as family law issues. And so we're also partnering with a number of agencies like Chris 180 and Men Stopping Violence, to name a few, to address harm in communities in a broader context through counseling and violence intervention.
And of course, I'll also get Kenya involved in this conversation as well. In Georgia alone, there are 50,000 domestic violence calls that take place. Can you talk a little bit about, the cases you've seen, the people that you work with, and give people a better understanding of the magnitude of your involvement in situations like these?
For sure. So from a national perspective, we see that research shows that about 1 in 5 women or 1 in 7 men experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And then here in Georgia, as you mentioned, domestic violence hotlines field more than 50,000 calls a year. And then specifically within Atlanta or Fulton County, leads the state in numbers of fatalities and near fatalities on domestic violence cases. So what we're seeing is individuals who are experiencing a history of domestic violence in the relationship, who are seeking resources to find themselves free from abuse. So, but thanks again for shedding the light on domestic violence. We know it's a very important topic and a very important issue to discuss, particularly here in the city of Atlanta.
And Kenya, I want to make sure I get some of your insight as well. What are some of the cases that you particularly deal with as both a social worker and program manager?
So, of course, the cases that I'm working with are victims of intimate partner abuse. And I want to kind of share a story of a client that I recently worked with to kind of give you an idea and give the viewers an idea of the type of work that we do. So we received a referral. When I say we, Standing with Survivors received a referral from a community partner regarding a victim that was fleeing a domestic violence relationship. When I reached out to this victim, she was at a local park with her children. And so I met her in the community at the park so we can talk about what was going on. And at the time, she couldn't return back home because the abuser lived there. And she was afraid for her safety and the safety of her children. So I talked with her. We came up with a plan that she felt that was best for her and that could keep her and her children safe. And we called around to some of the shelters. And at the time, the shelters were full. So I was able to get her, because the shelters were full, I was able to get her into an emergency hotel, into emergency hotel. And while she was at the hotel, she wanted to get a protective order. So at the time, I was able to assist her with that paperwork and that process of getting a protective order. One of our attorneys represented her for her 12-month hearing, and she was actually granted the 1-year protective order. Now, during that time and kind of behind the scenes, I was also able to refer her to a supportive housing program So while the court process was going on, she was able to get into this supportive housing program for her and her children. And I was able to help her relocate because she did have to relocate to another county to be a part of that program. So I was able to help her relocate during that process and help with moving expenses and everything else that comes along with relocating. I was able to help her during that process and also provide that some emotional support for her because she was uprooting her life. And so she did have some concerns with that because, of course, she wanted her children to be able to fit in with the school, and she just wanted to make sure everything was okay for her to find a job. And so I was able to emotionally be there and be her support system during that time and get her the things that she needed and connect her with the people in the right agencies in that county that could assist her. And so it's been about a year now, and she's thriving. Her children are thriving. She has not had any other issues with her abuser. She hasn't had any problems at all. And she's now at a place where she has regained her life back and taken control back of her life. So those are kind of some cases that I work with on a daily basis and provide that direct services to the client, not only just the financial resources, but the emotional part too, because it is a lot that clients go through and victims go through that you may not automatically think that someone would have to go through.
Absolutely. And I think a big part about this conversation, of course, is the moment that a victim or a survivor reaches out for help is a moment in their head where they're like, this is either the end for me or this is the beginning of my escape. And that's a very serious decision when they do find the bravery to find that help. So I wanted to ask, because I think this is on a lot of people's minds, especially if they're in that situation, how does this differ from reaching out to police, or how does this differ from reaching out to just a usual social worker in this case?
Yeah, so one of the things that we would like to see is a shift in how people think about domestic violence. So, police have become the default response in most societal challenges, and we see great work with partners like Police Alternatives Diversion Program and Atlanta's 311 program to support individuals who may want an alternative in calling 911 in non-emergency cases. And so we know that domestic violence situations can be volatile, and simply arresting everyone may not always be the answer, and usually is not the answer. So at ABLF and our volunteers and staff and supporters, we're just trying to make exactly the right services for individuals. And so, in fact, last week we were one of 11 programs around the country that presented to Stand Together Ventures Lab, which is a philanthropic community that funds innovative ideas that unbundle police services. So the idea is that communities have multiple avenues of support, and when individuals are experiencing domestic violence, the idea of having choices that are your own to make is really critical when we're looking at long-term safety and stability.
And another thing I wanted to emphasize, this is actually a free program that people can reach out and get that help that they need. I also know that Standing with Survivors is one of 11 startups that are participating in the Stand Together Ventures Labs. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you hear me all right? I think we may have lost some audio there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stand Together Ventures Lab had partnered with MIT Solve to launch the Unbundled Police Challenge, which is an incubator and an accelerator for early stage companies working on solutions to reduce interactions between law enforcement and their communities.
And I wanted to also make sure that people had access to, if they wanted to connect with your program. What are some resources that they can look into or sites they can visit to connect with somebody, for example, someone like Kenya or someone like you, to get the help that they need in their particular case?
Absolutely. So if at the city of Atlanta, they can call Atlanta's 311 non-emergency hotline to be connected with supportive services. And then if outside the city of Atlanta, they can call Georgia's 24-hour statewide hotline, which is 1-800-33-HAVEN or 1-800-334-2836. And you can also reach out for more information on how to support our work and for assistance via our website at www.ablf.org.
And of course, we're going to have those links as well as that phone number on our website, cbs46.com, where you can catch this full interview and get more information about that. I want to make sure I don't leave anything out. Is there a big takeaway that you hope people get from getting connected with this program?
One of the takeaways that I think is very important for people to know is that domestic violence is just not a concern for the victim. It's a concern for their children. Children who've experienced trauma from living in a domestic violence environment, they often struggle in school life and with their relationship and peers. So it affects their children as well. It also affects family members, extended family members and friends. They live under the stress of wanting to support their loved ones. So it affects them, but also it affects our entire community. For example, domestic violence is one of the leading causes of homelessness for women. So domestic violence is not just a concern for the victim, it's a concern for all of us. So I think that's one of the most important takeaways, that it affects all of us, not just the person that's being abused.
I wanted to make sure that I gave you a chance to also, if you had anything that you wanted to make sure that people understood about this initiative.
Yes, so what we're looking to do is reach more survivors earlier in the cycle of abuse. And so we want to make the process of securing a protective order more accessible. And then, of course, additional funding to outfit a van, which is a van that would allow for access to legal services in real time. So funding would support that sort of resource. And then, of course, the resources that lead to safety and stability for individuals, particularly that we saw during the pandemic, which certainly, as Kenya mentioned earlier, affected the availability of emergency housing and those sort of pieces.
Thank you both so much for your time. Of course, once again, this full interview, as well as those links and that phone number that was just mentioned, are going to be on our website, cbs46.com. If you know someone who is in this situation, make sure you forward that information along to them. Thank you, Cynthia and Kenya, both for your time, and we hope to talk to you more soon.
Thank you.